Hello everyone, and today I will be showing you how to build a RESTful services that connects with a database using Java. So to get started, we can start with a database, and I already have one here and it's currently running. So just for demonstrating, I'll create another one. MySQL, let's just def free tier, and let's just call it hw3 test db. And admin password, we can just say admin, and then password, we can just say password. password, password. And let's just leave it default. Public access, we want to enable that so that we can access it. And let's just leave it this on. Passwords looks good. And let's just hit click create. Okay, good. So now it's creating. Okay, okay, the database we just created is available now, and let's click it. So we see they have endpoint, and then we just had a username and password. So the first thing we want to do is that we use this tool, MySQL Workbench. Let's make a connection to this database. And the endpoint is just this. Connection name, we just give a name, hw3 testdb. And the host name will be just the name that Amazon provided, endpoint. And the username will be admin, and the password is, let's store it in, will be just admin. Let's make a test connection. Admin. Oh no, the password is password. Let's save. Okay, this successfully made a connection to the MySQL database. And we say okay. So we have hw3 testdb here. And the first thing we want to do is create a schema, because if we want to create some table, and we need to create schema in the database. So first thing we're gonna say schema, and we say create a schema and student survey, and we execute it. Okay, it's created. And if we refresh all here, and we can see that's our schema. Right now it doesn't have any table, it doesn't have any view or procedural functions. And that's it. That's all. We will go back to the MySQL this later. And next we need to develop a RESTful service using Java. And we're going to use a tool here. Next, we're going to create a RESTful service using Java, and we will be using a tool called Spring Boot. So basically, this tool allows us to just run this Java application very quickly. And before, we need to run in the Tomcat services and then export our Java file as a WAR file, and then put that WAR file in the Tomcat uh, directory that Tomcat wants us to put in. Right now, we use this Spring. The Spring will run the Tomcat, and it will help us just run the application. It will do all this moving job for us. And so first step, we need to, let's go to here, POM. So basically, this is a Maven file, and we use Spring and Maven. And we declare we use a Spring Boot framework here, and we will use Java 11, and we include some dependencies such as a data JPA and a starter web and Tomcat. So the web is a RESTful services, the package that we need. And the JPA allows us to connect with the database and help us to do all this modeling conversion. And then we also need this MySQL connected at Java. And we use Hibernate. And that's pretty much it. And there are some other like HTTP component we just needed for uh I don't think I need this. Oh, we need it because before we needed to for this web config. And next, we will start with a model. So in here, we break down the survey into three parts. We're going to store a student survey as students information and students address information. Then we will store in this custom field. So I provide 5 custom field. For our purposes, we only need 3. Uh, just in case in future, if there's a modification, the front end can always use these 2 custom field to store information. And if they're not sending anything, it will just be no. So here's our model, and we name this model. We give a table name of student survey so that MySQL will create this entity, create a table based on this entity. And similarly, we also have ID. This is uniquely identify an entity in the table. And we use generated value. And the strategy here we use is the sequence. So you will start from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that field is called survey ID. And similarly for student, we just have a table called student. And the generated value here is just a randomly generated, since this is a private information. We don't want to have any sequence in it, so you should randomly generate it. And in the survey, there's a field called student ID, which maps to a student entity, so that every survey will be uniquely identified. So every survey you can find a student in the student paper. So let me show you what it looks like. So I already ran this before, and you can see I have a student survey, and if we just select row, you can see that's all the survey that we currently entered. And you can see here that we have a survey ID. So first survey, second survey, third survey, they're they're in sequence. And we have a random address ID and random student ID. These student ID are uniquely identified by a student in a student table, so we don't know who they are. So for example, this student ID here, we can say select start from student. Student survey dot student, where student ID equal to this. Okay. Okay, so you see, we can uniquely find the student ID. We can uniquely find a student using the student ID. So we can find that survey is filled by this student. So that's basically it for for how this table works, linked to each other. And similarly for the address will also be randomly generated, the ID. And the address there has street, city, zip, and state. And that's the model. That's the basic model. And next we want to connect our entity with the MySQL. So we will do that first by going to application.property. So we need to fill out this link. So Spring JPA Hibernate, and there's a config. If you change to update, it will just run it, and you will create table if there's no table. But if there is a table, they will just updating the table. But if you change this to like create, this will erase the table and create a new table every time. We don't want to do that. We just want to update. Update is good enough for us. And let's connect this database with the one that we just created. And that's the endpoint. And let's just replace this with this endpoint. And see here we have a student. So this is the schema name that we want. I remember we just create a schema called student survey. So student underscore survey. And the username is admin and password is password. And that's it. And let's try to run it. See if we detect the database. Okay. It looks good. It seems like it detects the database. And if we refresh this table, and we can see this creates three tables. Actually four. But the Hibernate sequence basically used to see what's the next value for the student survey. But it's not our concern, so we only focus on address, student, and student survey. Okay, we can see that the connection part is done. And let's close that. And next we need to show how the RESTful service part is being conducted. So we need to create a repository. So basically what repository does is that you need to create an interface called student survey repo, and it need to extend from a JPA repository. This JPA repository is what helps you connect to the MySQL database. And you can see here, you will put your Java object's name here, and you will put ID, whichever type that you want to do, identify as ID here. So once you do that, this will know that okay, the Java will know that you want to connect your object with the MySQL database, and you want to create a table on it. So And one good thing is that a lot of this basic thing that is already implemented, all you need to just declare them in interface, then you can use them. So it's really convenience. You don't need to actually to write like all this find all. And even you can do this like student survey entity. So find by and okay, once we have this repository, okay, you can do this optional and then find by IDs, and then if you just input a string, and then you will return optional student entity for you. So why is optional? Because sometime it might not be able to find it. That's why it returns optional. So it won't return your null or something. It will just return your optional class, and you need to use this is present to see if the student entity actually have something. So that's our repository, and now we will have our service. So before we go into this service, we want to go through the controller first. I feel like that would be easier to explain. And so we use this auto wire to create a student survey service. If the student service is not exists, if it exists, then you will auto wire to here. So it's like an injection. And we will create two functions here. One is the post function, and one is the get function. And the get function here is the once you send your HTTP request as a get here to this directory survey all, this will return a list of the student survey DTO, and that contains all the student survey information. So we can simply do that by returning student survey service and get all survey. So we don't need to do anything here. And it produces a JSON file. And for the create student survey, and this is a post mapping, it takes in a JSON file, and then it will return a JSON file. So it will try to create a student survey, and we have a request body here, which means that we expect to receive a student survey DTO. And I use a valid here. What valid does is that it will validate whether the received file match the format I want. So let's take a look at this student survey DTO. Go to this declaration. So you see that I want my date format to be a JSON format, and then year, month, date, and I'm requiring to receive. I'm expecting to receive all this information. Basically it's the name and the address. So I do that by using not null. So if one of this is null, this survey will not be created. It will return error. It will return error. And what the student survey DTO does is that since we have three tables here, but they only send you one file, so we need to find a way to standardize the input and output. So therefore, we use this student DTO. We use this student DTO to standardize the input and output. And next, so we expect to receive a student DTO, which is a JSON format that has all the information. And we will try to create a survey. So if the survey is not being able to create it for whatever reason, maybe because the database is not connecting, something like that, it will return the exception, and we will catch the exception and then return to the returned this we will return this status as a bad request, which means the uh, information here is we did we is not valid. And for the get mapping, they will just call this get mapping, and we will return all the survey. And that's it for the controller. And let's go back to service to see what exactly does it do. So on the service, it auto wire all three repository, the three table that we created. And basically, if we want to input something in the table, we use this save command. We say save and student entity, and this will save a file on the table. So what we do is that we first take in this student survey DTO, the file that contains all the information, all the fields, and we create a student using the first name, last name, phone number, and email. And then this will return a student ID, and then we create an address using the street, city, zip, and state, so that we can create an address. And this will also return address ID. Then once we have student ID and address ID, we will just insert the rest of the field to the student survey entity. We will create a new student survey entity called that have the date information and the student ID and the address ID. And then we will set all 5 custom fields. And once we do that, and we basically save the survey to the student survey entity, and we will return the DTO back, which means we're done. So creating a student will be same thing. We try to save this student entity. We create a student entity based on their name, last name, phone number, and email address, and then we will try to save it. If not able to save it, we will return the error. If we're able to save it, we will return the get IDs. Similarly for the address. And for the all survey, it's a little bit different. We need to loop through all the student survey. And remember what we done here, that all student survey they contains the info IDs of the student and the ID of the address. So if we just take a student survey and return back, and it's not gonna work because we don't know what this student ID represented for. So what we're trying to do here is that we need to first loop through the student survey entity. We want to find all the student survey in the student survey repo, and then we need to map the student to the student. We need to map student survey DTO to student survey entity, and then to map the address to the student entity. And once we do that, once we map everything back to the student survey DTO, and then we will just return the list. We will add it to the list of student survey DTO, and then we will just return that list back. So basically, that's how RESTful services was implemented. We create a entity, and then we create repository that connects with the database. Then we write our logic in the service, and finally we use the controller to interact with the front end. And let's run it again. Okay, starting. And I will be using a tool here. The tool is Postman. So this Postman will simulate the RESTful. It will simulate the HTTP request and then send it to our application. So you see that Tomcat is running in port 8080, and then Spring Boot will help us do something to build it and then put it in the file that Tomcat expects us to put. And it's opened on port 8080. And you also see that it's finishing Spring Data repository scanning Streets APA repository interface, which means connected to the MySQL. And we use this. So first of all, let's send a GET request to the localhost. So it's nothing, but you can see that it detects something. Right now we didn't put anything in the database, so it will be nothing. And next, let's try to send a post request to the application. So I already have one here. Let's try to see if it works. Okay, it's bad request. The reason why it's bad request is because I'm missing a field here. So I think the field was the phone number. Um, Student survey DTO. Yep, it's the phone number. So phone number cannot be null. If you try to send a phone number to as a null, it will get this bad request. So it's not accepting it. And let's put in our phone number. And let's try to send it again. So you see 201 is created. So the information is created. And okay, when we send a bad request before, it also say that its validation failed because we have a one of argument is missing. So, but this one is a seed. And let's try to see if let's go back to get and let's try to see if we can see this in the get request. And now we see this in the get request. And we can also check our MySQL database. So student survey, and let me try to select row, and we can see that my student survey is here now. And let's try to send a few more. Changing the name. And check the date. And let's send it again. Okay, it's also created. And let's go back to get. Try to get it. So you can see now we have two files here. Two JSON file here. I mean, one JSON file contains two data. And if we go to this survey, and we have two records here. So that's pretty much it. We just demonstrate how to create RESTful services using Java and how to connect it with database using the JPA, Hibernate, and MySQL.